Are we waiting?
Yep, we're almost there.
Oh, yeah, it's 10:15 almost.
Okay, guys, stand by. And go ahead, Mr. Congressman.
Good morning, and thank you all for joining us this morning. I'm deeply appreciative of my colleagues, Congresswoman Robin Kelly, Congressman Mike Quigley, State Senator Celina Villanueva, and NIJC for joining me today, along with Vivian Khalaf and Lane Nassar. I also want to thank Congressman Brad Schneider, who is listening in on the call, another member of the Illinois Congressional Delegation. A few weeks ago, I traveled to Washington to vote for the CARES Act, but many, including immigrants, were largely excluded from federal relief. Families across Chicagoland are still suffering. I've listened to essential employees, to grocery store workers, nurses, and bus drivers who keep us going, and they express the fear that they have. These are mothers and fathers fearing not just for their own lives, but also for their children and their parents whom they take care of when they go home. I've spoken to educators worried about the inequities of our telelearning in Chicago public schools and other school systems and what it is creating. Too many kids, especially immigrant and minority families, who can't afford computers or even internet access. For these children, the pandemic has put their education on a standstill. I've listened to mothers and fathers laid off and worried about being evicted after the moratoriums are lifted. How will they afford back rent? Among the hardest hit are immigrant families. In fact, 1.2 million individuals were excluded from receiving stimulus checks due to their immigration status. Without any financial assistance, many immigrants have continued to work in essential fields. These are farm workers, meat packers, and grocery store workers. Many, too, are doctors and nurses. The outcome, however, is increased exposure, and that explains much of the spike in infections among the Latino community in Chicago. I'm deeply disappointed that the federal response has excluded these families, and I hope that the House rectifies these inequities in the coming days. Imagine being denied financial stimulus assistance simply because of the status of your spouse. Imagine U.S. children denied assistance because their parents are undocumented. Already more likely to have a tough financial situation, these children were also excluded. These exclusions are a slap in the face for many immigrants and their families who are more likely to pick, prepare, package, and deliver our food, save lives at hospitals, and who continue to make our country function. This is a slap in the face to over 3,700 Illinois families who would have otherwise received the stimulus check and who will be represented by this class action lawsuit that we'll be hearing about more. On one hand, Republicans call them illegals, on the other essential workers. The hypocrisy and the inequity must end. That is why I'm working with my colleagues in the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, in the Progressive Caucus, and members throughout the Congress to include measures to protect immigrants in future relief legislation. Congress must act swiftly with urgency to ensure all immigrant families receive the assistance they need and deserve. In the meantime, I want to thank the advocates and those working on the lawsuit. No one should be discriminated against because who they chose to marry, especially for reasons of immigration status. No child should be deprived of the financial aid they need during the pandemic such as this. Doing so is cruel and inhumane. No U.S. citizen child should ever have to struggle through a pandemic simply because of the status of their parent. Thank you for joining us now. Next, I would like to ask Congresswoman Robin Kelly to make some remarks. Good morning, Congresswoman.
Garcia, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you to everyone joining this important call. I'm on this call because this issue is not only impacting families in my district, but all over the United States. And I also want to be clear, this is not just a Latinx issue. There are U.S. citizens who are married to immigrants from all countries, and that's part of American freedom. Right now, we are talking about an issue of basic fairness, plain and simple, no doubt about it. Now, the president and his enablers will try and spin this, of course. They will make it seem like Democrats are working for new families and not their families. But we all know that's simply untrue. And I hope the press doesn't buy the spin, doesn't report the spin, and actually challenge it with facts. In addition to this being an issue of basic fairness, I'm so happy to be here supporting my colleague, Congressman Chuy García. He's been in Congress, not for a very long time, but you have definitely hit the ground running. And at a time when Black and brown Americans are dying from COVID-19 at disproportionately higher rates, it's great to have you, Chairman Garcia. And it's especially great that I know you're carrying the Health Equity and Accountability Act, a comprehensive plan from the Tri-Caucus to reduce and end health disparities. At this moment, when our communities face a growing and disproportionate risk of death and complications coupled with this heartless, I would say, administration, it's more vital than ever to stand shoulder to shoulder as a Black and brown alliance. But also Americans of shared values. The idea of an American citizen, and in many cases, their American citizen children, denying assistance because of who they are married to, is inconceivable, and it's not an American value. American families need this critical lifeline at this challenging and difficult time. And frankly, our economy needs the consumer spending. By denying economic support, the Trump administration is denoting some Americans as second-class citizens, which he does often. This is so wrong. It's unjust and it's un-American. I firmly believe that this case will be victorious in court because the law and right is on our side. All Americans are people within this country are equal under the law. That's a founding American value. Our best recourse now is the courts, and we thank our immigrant advocates for filing lawsuits on behalf of mixed status couples and their children. But thank you all again for joining. Chairman Garcia, I'm with you all the way. Anything that I can do, I'm there for you and the families. So now I turn it back over to the Congressman. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Congresswoman Robin Kelly, another member of the Illinois delegation and someone who is a true ally in this quest for justice for all of those children and families in our country. Next, I'd like to ask Congressman Mike Quigley to make some remarks, another great ally of the immigrant community in Illinois and across our land. Congressman?
Thank you so much, Representative Garcia. I appreciate your leadership role on this issue and echo what our friend Ms. Kelly said about you hitting the ground running. What this ordeal must certainly teach us is that we all need each other at the local, state, national, and worldwide basis. We've seen that failures to communicate, coordinate, and assist each other has only made this, this horrible ordeal worse. But this virus is coming after everyone, regardless of their immigration status, their income, or their class. But we know that the economic impacts and the health impacts of the pandemic have disproportionately harmed low-income and minority communities, including the immigrant communities. Everyone, regardless of immigration status, deserves to have access to the same financial support during these difficult times. This includes undocumented individuals and mixed status families eligible for cash relief. Immigrants own businesses and are essential workers in all our sectors, have their own rent to pay and families to care for. By not allowing immigrants and families of immigrants to qualify for economic assistance payments, we are further targeting minority communities that are already bearing the brunt of this pandemic. Early data has shown that some of the communities being hardest hit by the virus are minority communities. Much of this disparity exists because the pandemic is exacerbating the pre-existing racial divide in many areas of our country. We by doubling down on that divide, we must ensure that every family has the assistance they need to keep food on their tables and a roof over their heads as long as this crisis continues. Thank you again. It's great to be with all of you, my colleagues, and especially your assistants, Chuy, moving this forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike Quigley, a great friend and ally of our community and someone who is pushing the ball forward on justice for a relief package that is inclusive of as many people as possible, because that's a good public health response and it's about fairness. Next, I'd like to ask State Senator Celina Villanueva, another warrior for the immigrant community across Illinois, someone who's very familiar with this issue. State Senator Celina Villanueva, welcome. Your remarks, please.
Thank you, Congressman. I'm Celina Villanueva, State Senator of the 11th District, which in the state of Illinois is the district that has the highest percentage of population of Latino, Latina, Latinx communities. I am a former immigrant rights organizer and the daughter of Mexican immigrant parents. And when I hear the stories of constituents that are explaining the difficulties that they're experiencing because of the pandemic, the economic impact and the health impact, it's honestly probably the hardest moment of my life that I've ever had to go through, because there's only so much that we could do without help from the federal government. It's repugnant that we're seeing and cruel that we're seeing this administration play with the lives of so many people, especially with a pandemic that is disproportionately affecting African American and immigrant and Latino communities. I come from a zip code and live in the zip code with the highest number of COVID positive cases, and also a zip code that has a high number of undocumented immigrants. And we're talking about people who pay billions of dollars in taxes on a yearly basis. And this administration who has no problem with spending that money, but has absolutely also no problem with cruelly and unjustly discriminating against those same families and against those same communities. These are individuals, these are families, these are people that are in need of help. No one, absolutely no one, regardless of status, should be denied relief in this moment of time. For many of us, we've never seen this before. And to be experiencing this on top of the fact that because of your status, because you might be the US citizen child with undocumented parents, you're being denied relief is absolutely unjust and horrible. I can't even begin to imagine the despair that families are feeling. But I stand here in solidarity with all of those families and honored to be standing with members of Congress from the Illinois delegation and advocates of the immigrant communities to say that we're not going to stand for this, and we will be here to fight for you and with you throughout this situation. I'm going to say my remarks briefly in Spanish. Mi nombre es Celina Villanueva, soy la senadora estatal del Distrito 11. El el distrito en Illinois que tiene donde la mayoría de la población es gente inmigrante y gente latina. Soy hija de padres inmigrantes y los pasados meses de hablar con gente que está pasando por momentos increíbles y difíciles es algo que me duele en el alma. De tener una administración en la Casa Blanca que está discriminando contra nuestras familias y nuestras comunidades es algo que no hay suficientes palabras de describir. Pero estamos aquí presentes para decir que estamos luchando con ustedes y con todas las familias inmigrantes para decir que todos que están aquí, no importa su estatus inmigratorio, deben y merecen recibir algún estímulo en este momento. No podemos dejar a nadie, dejarlos atrás. En este momento tenemos que unirnos como gente, como seres humanos y protegernos unos a los otros. Con eso le quiero dar las gracias al congresista García, a todos los miembros del Congreso que están hoy presentes, a todas las personas, las organizaciones que están luchando para nuestra gente. Estamos aquí con ustedes y luchar con ustedes. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Senator Villanueva, for your remarks and your efforts in Illinois to close some of the gaps that have left immigrants out. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Julian Lazalde from the National Immigrant Justice Center to talk about this case and why it is so important.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Congressman Garcia, and thank you to all the elected officials who are on this call and leading this fight as well, not just in Washington, D.C., but certainly also in Illinois and in Springfield. So again, I'm with the National Immigrant Justice Center, which serves approximately 10,000 individuals every year with free or low-cost legal services and representation for immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers in particular. And many of those individuals that we serve also live in mixed-status families themselves or mixed-status households. And this issue of economic insecurity is unfortunately nothing new to your typical NIJC client. Our legal services and representation work focuses on those whose household income is 200% or below the federal poverty line. So again, this is economic insecurity, even pre-COVID, was something that was very, very real for NIJC clients day in and day out. And because of that, a lot of the people that we work with, NIJC clients, come from the hardest hit sectors of the economy by this pandemic, which has certainly only been deepened in an already tenuous economic situation for them and their families. And recently, what we've seen in asking and speaking to some of our attorneys is that NIJC clients have reported what we would all expect, which is increased fear and anxiety about losing their jobs for those who have not already lost their jobs or had their hours severely cut in this pandemic economy. Like workers throughout the nation, many NIJC clients and their loved ones have already or are currently facing the prospect of losing employment, particularly as restaurant workers or as small business owners close, and small businesses close, and also a lot of our clients work as caregivers and house cleaners. And those are also sectors that have been asked to stay home without pay. And an example of that is an NIJC client, Naomi, whose name we have changed for privacy considerations right now, but Naomi is living with her grandmother and two small children, having finally found safety here in the United States after fleeing violence in Central America and winning her protection in immigration court here in the United States. Naomi's grandmother, who she's living with, intended to support her and her great-grandchildren, but unfortunately, the grandmother lost her job as a caregiver, again, one of these highly hit sectors, as a caregiver for elderly individuals because of COVID-19. And so with Naomi unable to obtain supplemental income through the stimulus, this multi-generational mixed status family faces that possibility of increased severe severe poverty. And again, this is a family that even pre-COVID was already in a tenuous economic circumstance. And so for us, this is not just theoretical in nature. We're seeing more of this through the attorneys that are on staff that are reporting this. And we expect this, unfortunately, to continue, if not possibly worsen. And so therefore, this lawsuit and what it does is of great interest to NIJC, and we look forward to working with all of you in whatever capacity we can to be helpful to this endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks on behalf of the National Immigrant Justice Center. And now we're going to hear directly from the attorneys who were the first to file a lawsuit challenging the law that produced this great exclusion and injustice for children across the country. And they filed it here in the Northern District of Illinois, I believe. But they've also filed lawsuits in other parts of the country. So thank you for joining us this morning in defense of the excluded mixed status families. I'd like to introduce Ms. Vivian Khalaf and Lana Nassar, who will talk to us about the significance of this lawsuit and what the prospects may be. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. My name is Vivian Khalaf. I'm a member of the law firm of Khalaf Abuzir, one of the lead attorneys in the class action that the congressman referred to, John Doe versus Trump, filed in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. I first want to thank Congressman Garcia for taking the initiative and putting this press conference together to highlight this very, very important issue. I'd also like to thank the other elected representatives on this phone call. You have a long history of supporting immigrant rights, human rights, and are always on the right side of history. So thank you to all of you. The denial of the stimulus relief to mixed status families and US citizens in particular, who are the subjects of our lawsuit, is not only an immigration issue, it is an American issue. This is not about legal or illegal immigration, although in my opinion, it is nothing but a continuation of this administration's policy to curtail both legal and illegal immigration. Again, this is an American issue. It's about US citizens who already come from disenfranchised and marginalized communities, who struggle every day to make a living and to put food on the table of their families. They have been discriminated against by their own government only because of who they chose to marry and how they chose to file their taxes. Two rights guaranteed to all of us as US citizens. I've been an immigration practitioner for over 28 years and can tell you that I have never in my life received so many phone calls, hundreds of phone calls from distressed clients begging to understand why it is that they have not received their stimulus checks when others in similar situations have. There was nothing I can do for them but to collaborate with my co-counsel, who you will hear from in a moment, and file this lawsuit in federal district court to remedy this grave injustice. We are not only proud, but also very humbled to represent John Doe and the thousands of other similarly situated United States citizens who are crying out for help during these unprecedented and very difficult times. I'm going to turn it over to my co-counsel to briefly discuss the specifics of the lawsuit. And thank you again, Congressman and the other congressmen and state reps. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lana Nassar, and I'm an attorney at Blaise and Nitschke PC in Chicago, Illinois. First, I'd like to echo Vivian's words of gratitude. We are incredibly grateful for the congressman and all the elected officials who are shedding light on this incredibly important and frankly disturbing issue. When Vivian contacted me, we began to look into this and we realized there are many things in the law that are in the gray area. This is black and white. This is a constitutional violation of United States citizens and their United States citizen children. Simply a violation of the First, Fifth, and 14th Amendments to the United States Constitution. Courts in the United States have repeatedly recognized a fundamental right to marriage. This is directly and blatantly a violation of that right. Simply, we are asking that the courts strike the exclusion provision in the CARES Act that requires two married individuals to file with Social Security numbers. We are asking that the courts do this in an expeditious manner, as this is an emergency and our clients needed the money a month ago. We are confident in our judicial system. We are confident that they will redress this immediate and irreparable harm suffered by 1.2 million Americans, which does not even quantify the number of US citizen children that are affected by this. We thank you so much, and we are forever indebted to shedding the light on this issue.
Thank you so much, Lana and Vivian, for explaining the basis of the lawsuit and why you're seeking a remedy from the court to correct the exclusions in the CARES Act. I also want to reiterate that, of course, in the House, we were seeking to be as inclusive of as many people as possible in our efforts, but of course it had to pass in both chambers. This was a Senate-originated bill as well, thus some of the obvious exclusions reflecting, I think, the policy from the White House to punish immigrants and to leave out as many people as possible and to punish people by the same token. I'm going to make a few remarks in Spanish and then we will go to the question and answer segment for members of the media. Quiero agradecer a toda persona que nos acompaña esta mañana. Han escuchado los mensajes de solidaridad de dos miembros del Congreso de los Estados Unidos, dos de mis colegas y también de la senadora Celina Villanueva. Estamos expresando nuestro apoyo a la acción que han tomado las abogadas que acaban de dar un breve resumen de por qué entablaron esta demanda en contra del gobierno de los Estados Unidos y que buscan asegurar que haya justicia para el respeto a un matrimonio y el requerimiento que ha excluido a millones de personas de recibir el beneficio financiero, los cheques que han recibido otras personas en nuestro país por el simple hecho de que una de las dos personas que han llenado su reporte de rentas, mejor conocido en inglés como income tax, no pudieron cumplir con ese requisito y que ahora toda la familia, siendo 4, 5 o 6 miembros, han sido excluidos de recibir los cheques de $1,200 o de $500. Creemos que es una injusticia. Queremos rectificar esto. Es lo que pretende la demanda que se ha entablado y también con la ayuda de mis colegas queremos asegurar que en cualquier otra acción que tome el Congreso que no haya la exclusión de la comunidad inmigrante en los Estados Unidos. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos esta mañana. Ahora vamos a proceder y tomar preguntas de la prensa. Thank you so much for your indulgence. I now would like to open it up to any members of the press who would like to ask questions.
Hello. Are you guys able to listen to me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, this is Carla Leal with Telemundo Chicago. I wanted to ask Congressman Garcia if he could answer in English and Spanish. I know that when the CARES Act was initially signed, it seemed like it happened so quickly, and we knew that undocumented were not going to get this. But how is it that it wasn't raised as a red flag that mixed families with mixed immigration status on the people filing for their taxes wouldn't get this?
Well, as you will recall, the bill known as the CARES Act originated in the Senate. So obviously it had these provisions baked in. It is my understanding that House leadership attempted to make the bill more inclusive of more people, but there was objection in doing so. And when the bill came to the House, it was a take it or leave it situation, complicated further by the fact that we are working under these very unusual circumstances where bills are being moved without the opportunity to have committee hearings, without the type of deliberation and the sausage making that normally occurs in Washington. So the extraordinary circumstances in part are part of the reason why this happened. Nevertheless, all of us are very, very supportive of the lawsuit that has been filed because we think that it seeks to correct one of the gravest shortcomings of the bill. And as we participate in the crafting of a House-originated bill that will be before the Congress probably at the end of this week or the beginning of next. We hope to remedy the exclusions that are especially making life difficult for people in the Latino and immigrant community across the country. This is one of the worst examples of those inclusions. Ahora, en español, a la pregunta de Carla Leal, el proyecto de ley conocido como el CARES Act, que excluye a un sector de la comunidad inmigrante en los Estados Unidos, se originó en el Senado de los Estados Unidos. Consecuentemente, refleja las prioridades de la administración Trump, de una política anti-inmigrante, xenofóbica y que busca excluir y castigar a ciertos sectores de la comunidad inmigrante. Debido a la pandemia, el proceso normal de aprobar leyes no pudo funcionar en esta instancia y la decisión que tuvimos que tomar en el Congreso es aceptar o rechazar. Como el proyecto de ley tenía diferentes aspectos de cosas buenas, como los pagos a las familias trabajadoras, el incremento en los beneficios de compensación, la inversión en más fondos para pruebas y para tratamiento para la población en general, hicimos una decisión muy difícil de apoyar el proyecto de ley, pero reconociendo y criticando las exclusiones que el proyecto incluye, esta siendo una de ellas, y por lo cual los abogados que esta mañana nos acompañan han explicado qué es lo que buscan corregir a través de los tribunales federales del país. Muchas gracias. Next question, please.
Hello, this is Abdel Jimenez with the Chicago Tribune. My question is to Congressman Garcia. I just wanted to confirm, how many is it that was it 3,700 that you said that you estimate that there are mixed status families here in Illinois?
The number of excluded individuals is, according to the numbers I've seen, about 1.2 million people. However, when an entire family is excluded, as is the case because of this requirement of having two Social Security numbers, the number grows. I'll defer on that answer to the attorneys who may have a better number yet.
Sure, I can answer that. The Migration Policy Institute reports that there's 1.2 million Americans married to immigrants. The question is, of those 1.2 million, how many file joint tax returns, one with a Social Security number, one with an I-10? That number would, in our perspective, is something the defendants have to produce to us because we don't have that number. That being said, as the congressman just stated, there are numerous children that are not accounted in that 1.2 million number, which would be something that the defendants have in their records.
All right, and another question for Congressman Garcia. So, what else are you doing, in Congress with the Hispanic Caucus to include undocumented workers and also just like these mixed status families from, to receive federal aid in the future or in future packages?
Very timely question, Mr. Jimenez. We have been advocating that in the Hispanic Caucus, the Asian Pacific Caucus as well. The Progressive Caucus has taken a very strong position, urging Speaker Pelosi and the leadership in the House not to exclude the numbers of people that were excluded. Many of us feel that the undocumented should also benefit from the financial assistance that Congress is providing. Why? Because if you exclude any segment of the population, you're not having the type of public health response that is warranted. As long as we drive people into the shadows of society and people are forced to not seek testing, not seek treatment for a positive case or someone who is afflicted with the virus, the chances that they will spread the virus among the general population is even greater. It is magnified. Thus, the best public health response is to be inclusive of everyone, to recognize the national emergency that has been declared by both the president, by the Congress, by governors throughout, and mayors. The only responsible, the most responsible and coherent public health response is to be inclusive of everyone. Next question, please.
Congressman, we have a question. Yes, Congressman, we have a question in the chat. This is from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel from Mr. Bruce Filmetti. Question is, are there more of the suits, and this is to the lawyers, are there more of the suits than the John Doe in Chicago? An example in Wisconsin, or other similar suits?
Excuse me. I just want to say thanks to everyone. I've got to pop onto another call. Chuy, thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you so much for your work in the trenches. God bless you all. And we'll talk.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, Mike.
Take care.
Okay, and if I can answer that question in response to other suits. We currently have a suit filed in the Central District of California, as well as the Eastern and Western Districts of Wisconsin. So 4 total. The first to be filed nationwide was the one in the Northern District of Illinois. But both law firms, Lana's and myself, have also initiated 3 others nationwide.
Okay. And we've got a question here. This may be for you as well, Vivian, from Estefania Flores from Univision. What is the total number of people that have been added to this collective lawsuit so far?
Well, the class hasn't been certified, so we still have the one plaintiff, John Doe. But Lana can correct me if I'm wrong, but as of yesterday, we had over 5,000 potential class members who have contacted us to join the lawsuit. If that number has changed, it's probably near 6 today, because there's an average of $400 to $500, I wish it was dollars, individuals who contact us daily.
Thank you, Vivian. The next question is from Carla Leal from Telemundo. Why is it important for Illinois to have their own class action lawsuit in this regard? This would be for Lana or Vivian.
Sure, I can answer that. Our first plaintiff that approached Vivian was a Illinois resident. So we acted as quick as we could and filed in the Northern District of Illinois. This is an emergency, so we feel that it is incredibly important that the efforts redress the harm as immediate as possible. So that's why we filed in Illinois first.
I spoke with him already. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question here. Suzanne, we believe this is Suzanne Gambo from NBC. She's saying, I'd like to know, what are the realistic options for a speedy response, since an injunction would mean giving out money and then having to call it back if a decision is not upheld? Also, as far as how far are Democrats, so that's the first question to the lawyers. The second question, this would go for members of Congress. How far are Democrats willing to go on this negotiation? Is it a red line that we saw when Democrats in the Senate, when Republicans wanted to voice vote only in increasing PPP, and the Democrats blocked it? So 2 parts to that question. We'll take the lawyer.
Let me take the second question first.
Okay.
One, we still don't have all of the elements of the next bill that will be voted on in the House, either this weekend or the beginning of next. We know that it will be bigger and bolder, and hopefully a lot more inclusive than previous bills. Indication of that is the fact that both Speaker Pelosi and Democratic leader in the Senate, Schumer, held a press conference with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus and Chairman Castro last week, expressing their support to cease excluding mixed status families. I think that is a positive sign. We just don't know how much our push to be more inclusive of all immigrants in the next relief bill will be, but we will continue to strive to include as many people as possible, but it's still too soon to know. And of course, we don't know what are some of the things that Republicans will want in the Senate. What we do know is that the American public expects Congress to act big to provide relief, and we're hoping that that spirit will create a climate and an environment that will enable us to pass legislation which is reflective of that spirit and that becomes the law and includes all people in the country.
Thank you, Congressman. And the other question to the lawyers, the first one, the matter of injunction and relief.
Sure. We filed an emergency motion in the Northern District of Illinois 2 weeks ago for a temporary restraining order, preliminary injunction, and declaratory relief. The judge in Illinois has set a briefing schedule, and we would first hear from the judge in Illinois in the end of May, early June. We also filed a similar emergency motion in the Central District of California, and the first time we'll hear from that is also going to be early June. That being said, we would not be surprised if this is appealed one way or the other. I can tell you that that's something that we expect, and that process obviously is going to take time, and we do foresee this potentially going to the Supreme Court. That being said, we believe, we believe Congress may be able to act more quickly than the courts. We are very hopeful about that, but I can't give you an exact date, unfortunately.
Just to follow up on that in terms of people being able to receive payments if we do get an injunction and then having to return it if it's overturned. I mean, the administration has bigger fish to fry at this point. There are dead people receiving stimulus checks and people who don't otherwise qualify getting their checks, and they're still in a scurry to try to attempt to get those checks back. Having to ask US citizens to return checks after having received them pursuant to court order is something I can't envision and don't even want to think about, but I doubt that would happen. That's my opinion, and hopefully it doesn't.
Great. Thank you so much, Vivian Khalaf and Lana Nassar, for briefing us on the status of the lawsuit and for taking questions from the media. I want all of the folks that have joined us on the call this morning, including members of the press, to know that we continue to strive for greater fairness and justice for all immigrants in our country, and know that you can also count on us to continue fighting for our U.S. citizen children, spouses, and immigrant mixed status families, because that is the right thing to do. Thank you all for joining us. I want to thank Senator Villanueva and, of course, my colleagues in Congress for joining us and for their statements of support for justice for these mixed status families. Again, thank you, and we continue to strive for greater fairness.